So, Stephen, we got so much to dig into today, but why don't we start with this? Tell us a little bit about your journey of how you got into flow and peak performance, and this being a passion of yours.
I really wanted to understand how do people work, human behavior and performance, but back then it was just human behavior, and it was a great time to be interested in it because neuroscience was starting to tackle these questions. I was always a little suspicious of psychology. It felt too squishy, too subjective, very individual. Things were really indeterminate. Neuroscience turns out to be just the same, but I didn't know that at the time. At the time, I was like, oh, neuroscience is absolute mechanism. It's the same in everyone and shaped by evolution. So in the 90s, behavioral neuroscience, how do people work, was a thing. It was no longer like this cluster of neurons in this part of the brain does what. It was, hey, how do human emotions work? And how does consciousness work? And how do we make buying decisions? And, all those kinds of questions fascinated me. Simultaneously, totally unrelated, I was obsessed with action sports, surfing, skiing, rock climbing, snowboarding, the like. And I was living in these communities, taking part in these adventures. And if you know anything about the 1990s and action sports, it's often referred to as the so-called era of impossible, where more impossible feats, things that had never been done before, got done. And what was really amazing, it wasn't just that we were doing the impossible, we were iterating on the impossible. Somebody would go out, they'd do something that nobody ever thought was possible. And then 2 days later, somebody else would do something slightly better or slightly different. And so it was this crazy flowering of human potential, unlike anything that anybody had ever seen. And yet, in these communities, like with these actual athletes, what I was seeing up close did not match anything that was sort of in the peak performance literature. If you read especially going up to like the early 20th century, like peak performers, they have good childhoods. They get, they specialize early, they get coddled a lot, they get treated well, they study well, they come from good families, they have money, they're well fed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all the folks I was hanging out with, this was a deep punk rock subculture. Everybody I knew came from like a broken home and a shitty childhood. They had no money. They had no education. There was so much risk taking and so much substance abuse. And normally if you put those things together in a community, people die young and go to jail. What they do not do is reinvent what's possible for the human species. So what was happening with the athletes, how was this possible, became my first question. And neuroscience was the tool I wanted personally to use to address it. And that was sort of where everything started for me. That led to countless articles. I wrote a blog for Psychology Today for a very long time on these ideas. I then turned around and wrote a blog for Forbes for a very long time. Psychology Today was sort of, how does this stuff work? Forbes was, how do we apply it for innovation and entrepreneurship and that sort of stuff? And that led into 7 books at this point, and actual, and then the Flow Research Collective, which is my current organization, is a science and training organization. On the research side, on the science side, we partner with folks at Stanford and UCLA and USC and on and on and on. And we study the neurobiology of peak human performance, what's going on in the brain and the body, performing at our best. And then we take that science and we use it to train people. And we work globally in about 130 countries. We work with everybody from members of the US Special Forces and professional athletes to a tremendous amount of C-suite executives and entire companies. We train folks at Facebook, Meta. We train folks at Bain Capital. We train folks at Accenture, San Francisco Police Department, the Air Force, big spectrum. And then we train individuals, soccer moms in Iowa, insurance brokers in Delhi, coders in Bangkok, take your pick. So the only reason I think you would care about all that bragging is we're data geeks. We measure everything and anything. So we have a really good, wildly diverse, globally accurate picture of what works and what doesn't. But it started with a bunch of action bachelor sport athletes doing stuff that nobody thought was possible, and they definitely shouldn't have been doing. And me trying to figure out what the hell was going on.